Is Cypher the fun, fast, genre agnostic role playing game that you and your players have been clamoring for? Is this a narrative forward system which fulfills a promise of both quick yet unique character generation while being easy to grasp for players of all experience levels? Does Cypher deserve to be part of the conversation to be the role playing game at your game table? Well, you're going to find out because I'll be sharing my review of the Cypher Character Rulebook from Monte Cook Games right after this. Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I'll be sharing my review of the Cypher Character Rulebook from Monte Cook Games. This is written by Monte Cook, Bruce R. Cordell, and Sean K. Reynolds. The 320-page hardcover is slated to arrive in stores on August 25th. It's going to carry an MSRP of $49.99. The PDF should be available right about that time, I believe, for $19.99. Although I have also heard $19 even. I don't think that's going to be the case. Having said that, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got the character rulebook for Cypher. A few things to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, my friends over at Monte Cook Games were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. These days, it's important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a good feel for what you're going to find inside. And then lastly, I actually did share a live first look at the character rulebook last week on the Gaming Gang Dispatch. So if you want a far deeper dive, a far more close look at the contents of this volume, by all means, check out that episode. And there are timestamps so you can jump past the tabletop role-playing game news and get right on into that first look. Now, the first thing we're going to do here is take a peek at the credits page. A lot of folks worked very hard to bring this to life. So let's give credit where credit is due. Look at all those artists. And speaking of art, I've got to say, for the most part, the majority of the artwork in this is fantastic. Love the artwork, and there is loads of it. So if you're not familiar with Cypher, it is a genre-agnostic role-playing game. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of genres that have been tackled by Monte Cook Games. They certainly have, and there are some outside IPs that do utilize Cypher as well. But for the most part, this is what some people like to refer to as a generic role-playing game. Now, I don't tend to like that term because it makes it sound like, it's not very good. It's, generic. That is not the case here. But this is a genre-agnostic role-playing game. Although this rulebook does have a lot of different genres in it for you to utilize. This is a completely player-facing volume as well. So there is absolutely nothing in this book that cannot be shared with the players. So one thing I will point out as far as Cypher goes, it is, in my opinion, one of the easiest role-playing games to introduce to new players because the mechanics are very, very simple for people to wrap their heads around. As an example, the player tells the GM what their character wants to do. The game master then decides what the difficulty level of that is, ranging from 1, being practically automatic, all the way up to 10, which is essentially impossible. And then they multiply that difficulty number by 3. That is the target number that the player needs to roll on a 20-sided die. Now, obviously enough, multiply 7 or more by 3, and you can't roll that on a 20-sided die. So what happens is the player, as well as the other players at the table, are going to look for ways to bring that difficulty down. We have things like effort, where the player will spend points from their character's pools in order to bring the difficulty level down. They might get assistance from another player character. They might use an asset. They might use a cipher. Talk about the ciphers in just a little bit. But what you're aiming to do is try to bring that difficulty number down so it is a number that could be rolled on a 20-sided die. You can also push your rolls if you fail. You have to spend effort from the applicable pool, and then you get to roll again. In fact, there is no limit to how many times you can re-roll as long as you have points in your pool to spend. Let's talk about the pools. So with the pools, we have essentially 3 attributes. We have might, speed, intellect. Now, the pool points don't necessarily represent the ability. So as an example, let's say you had 14 points in your speed pool. That isn't applicable to other role-playing games where you have a 14 dexterity. What it means is that you can spend more points to use effort for tasks that utilize speed. You also have more points that you can spend on abilities that you need to pay to activate from your speed pool. So it means there's more of a focus on that particular attribute with your character. That's all the pools mean. Character creation is now very, very streamlined. In fact, there's flow charts in here to help you through the process. So each character will start off with 8 points in each of the 3 pools. They then have 6 points that they can allocate however they want. So if you want to have 14 points in one of your pools, that's fine. Now, as the character advances, they have the opportunity to gain more points to put into their pools. There are a variety of different things that they can do as they advance. We don't have levels in Cypher. We have tiers. We have up to tier 6, although that is not necessarily the end of the character's advancement. They can continue to gain additional items. We'll talk about advancement at the end. But their tiers run from 1 starting character all the way up to 6, which is someone who is very, very powerful. So with the character creation, you have to decide, is this going to be a real world setting, or is this like fantasy or science fiction or superheroes? Anything that's going to be utilizing like advanced technology or superpowers or magic spells, magic abilities, things like that. If it is real world, then your character is going to be a bit less powerful than if you were playing science fiction or fantasy. Now, what you'll do is you will find that the Cypher characters are an adjective, noun, verb. That's how they're described. That has not changed. So you still have the adjective, which is the descriptor. You've got the noun, which is the type. And then you also have the verb, which is a foci. Real world characters do not get a foci. So that is something that you won't have to worry about if you're playing like, espionage or action adventure. If you're looking at something along like Indiana Jones, you're probably not going to have foci as far as your characters. So what you'll do is you get to pick skills because you have an occupation. You get to assign your points with your pools. Now, in a real world situation, the GM can provide the option of allowing characters to pick 2 more skills. It is optional. So in a real world, you're going to get 2 skills. You also have the opportunity to take a 3rd skill if you want to take what's called an inability. And an inability means it's something that you're just really not good at. And it does have to be a skill that would be utilized quite often to kind of offset the bonus of having a 3rd skill. Now, this applies regardless of what genre you're playing in. So you want to keep that in mind. So really, the character creation is very fast, very easy. And there are a lot of ways to put characters together to really get you the sort of character that the player wants to play. Now, there is also going to be a player option book that's coming out. I do believe it's before the end of the year, that is going to have more descriptors, more types, more foci throughout. There's also a Game Master's Guide. I believe it's just called the GM's Guide, which is supposed to hit stores, I believe, September. And there are references to that throughout the character rulebook. Essentially, these are all the rules you need to play the game. And the reality is the rules come out to about 20 pages. Really not a whole lot. Now, having said that, there are some things that are going to get into a lot more detail as far as the GM's guide, that you might be reading through this and think, wow, you know what? I'd really like to know a lot more about that. Sadly, it is going to be in the GM's guide. So that's where you're going to be able to find it. But in essence, all the rules you need are in this volume. Now, would I say that you could absolutely play Cypher just using this book? Technically, yes. But you also have to keep in mind that this volume does not have any sort of bestiary, doesn't have any sort of enemies and adversaries, anything like that. It does include ciphers. We'll talk about ciphers in just a little bit. It does talk about the GM intrusion, the player intrusion. I'll talk about that in a moment as well. But the vast majority of that info is going to be in the GM's guide. So technically, I would say, yes, you could play and run Cypher from this book. I don't really think it's realistic, though. So we are going to get information about different genres. So we got fantasy, and we actually have 2 kinds of fantasy. We have the dungeon delving sort of fantasy. So we've got like the Dungeons and Dragons kind of fantasy. And then we also have the epic fantasy, which is more in the vein of, say, Lord of the Rings. So we have various different types that fit into that. Each of the types is going to give us a breakdown of the background options available, what their abilities will be, and their abilities will change as the character goes up in tier. So that's important to keep in mind. Now, the various different abilities and skills, foci, all are explained in this book. As you can see here, we've got different species that are available in fantasy, and they aren't huge multi-page entries. Looking at right here, we've got 3 Hellborn Human Orc on 1 page, plus artwork, plus a little information along the sidebar here. I love that, because let's just get to the point. We don't need a lot of wasted page space in here just because you're trying to fill a word count. Then we get into science fiction. Science fiction, we've got a couple of options here. And we've got hard science fiction. So if you're looking at something that is near future or maybe just a few hundred years out, say like The Expanse is a great example of hard science fiction. Arthur C. Clarke stories tend to be hard science fiction. Larry Niven as well. We also have space opera. So space opera is more like Doc E.E. Smith's Lensman series, or of course, obviously, Star Wars. So definitely dig how we've got the different genres broken up. We kind of take a deeper dive into different genres. Of course, we have the real world kicks us off with a bunch of different genres as well, subgenres, I guess I will say. We also get superheroes. Superheroes has a lot of page space devoted to it because Cypher does seem like it would translate very well to superheroes, especially the foci, because a lot of the different foci are actually superpowers or magical powers, things like that. So something that I have noticed has changed in Cypher is the pools no longer affect your health. So back in Cypher system, when a player character took damage, it came off of their pools. And it's similar in scope to Original Traveler, where you would lose points off your attributes. And if you ended up with 0 in 3 specific attributes, then your character was dead. Same thing with Cypher system. If you ended up with 0 points in your 3 pools, then you are going to take a dirt nap. That has changed. And the reason why it's changed is because players didn't want to spend pool points because that was their health. So they wouldn't utilize their abilities as often, or they wouldn't utilize their effort in order to lower the difficulty of what they're trying to attempt to do. Definitely like that a lot. So we now have wounds. So we have minor wounds, moderate wounds, major wounds. It'll change a little bit depending on the type of character you're playing, as well as the genre. But for the most part, player characters will have 3 wounds of each category. So you got the 3 minor, 3 moderate, 3 major. If you run out of minor wounds, that then rolls over into moderate wounds. If those fill up, that rolls over into your major wounds. Now, there are ways for monsters and enemies to actually give you major and moderate wounds. So it's not only minor wounds adding up and then kind of cascading into the higher level of wound. Now, you could have a monster that actually gives you a major wound. So that is entirely possible. There are different ways to recover wounds as well. But if you run out of wounds, well, you're going to be taking that aforementioned dirt nap. Your character is dead. Very easy to figure out. So I definitely like that. Something else that has changed, the descriptors. Descriptors in Cypher system tended to have a bit more to them. So they tended to have like unique abilities sometimes. Now with the descriptor, it's essentially giving you a couple of points to put into a pool and then a skill. And that's what the descriptor does. The type also will give you additional things. Now, gone are the archetypes. So in Cypher system, we had 4 major archetypes that really all your characters fell into. So we don't really have classes, we have types. But back in Cypher system, we did have the 4 archetypes. So we had the warrior, we had the adept, we had the operative, and then we had the speaker. And it was essentially, what is the main focus of that character? What is that character's role? They are gone. So we now have types which really do drill down into specific class type characters here. And I'll be honest, I like that quite a lot. I really do. So here we're taking a look at the foci. So the foci are going to give you different abilities by tier. We also have a flow chart here as far as selecting the different aspects of that tier. So one of the cool things about Cypher, in fact, one of the things I think is a huge selling point for Cypher are the GM intrusions and the player intrusions. So whenever a player rolls a 1 on their 20-sided die, that brings about a GM intrusion. And what that is, the game master comes up with something to make the situation not necessarily more difficult, but maybe a little more interesting. Maybe the stakes get higher because of that GM intrusion. Players do not earn experience points from rolling a 1 and getting a GM intrusion. What they will get are experience points when the GM brings about an intrusion on their own. And it's recommended probably not have more than one GM intrusion for each player or for the group in an hour. So you don't want to constantly be doing GM intrusions. You don't want to be stepping on the player's toes. Plus, you don't want to be handing out tons of experience points either. Now, the advancements that the player character can earn cost 4 experience points. So not much. So when you get a GM intrusion, the GM lays out the situation and then gives away 2 experience points to the player whose character is being affected by the intrusion. Or if it's the group, they all get 1 experience point. What's cool with the intrusions is the player that receives 2 experience points, if the intrusion is just affecting them, gets to give away one of those experience points to another player. Whoever they want to give it to, they can hand it on over. So it's a cool way to share the wealth a little bit. Something else we have are player intrusions. So players can spend an experience point to improve their situation. They can also spend an experience point to respond to the GM intrusion. So really interesting stuff here. So as an example, let's say the GM intrusion is that the player character loses their footing and they slip and they fall into this river, right? So they're being swept away by the river. Now the player could say, okay, I'm going to spend an experience point for a player intrusion. And as they're going down the river, they're able to grab onto a branch and they're able to hang on so they're not swept all the way down river. That'd be a great example of a player intrusion. So let's finish up. Let's talk about ciphers, because that's where the game gets its name, right? Ciphers. So we have ciphers. We got 2 kinds of ciphers. We have ciphers that are essentially inspirational, or just like a burst of adrenaline, something that is simply a one shot. It's used and it's done. So it's disposable. And we also have other ciphers, which are kind of like things. So you could have a healing potion as a cipher. You could have a spell being a cipher. You could have some piece of ancient technology, some alien technology. That is a cipher. Ciphers are always use them and lose them. And depending on the tier of the character, will determine how many ciphers they can have at one time. And of course, their type might allow them extra ciphers. So at tier 1, players get to have 2 ciphers. And it's important for the players to understand, spend the ciphers. You're going to get more ciphers. So use them. Ciphers are normally randomly generated. So the player may have ciphers that they just don't see being useful. They can give ciphers away to other players. They can dispose of ciphers so that it allows them the opportunity to get more ciphers. So the ciphers are very, very interesting. They can be any number of things, but it is also another way for the players to take some agency over what's going on at the game table that's a little bit outside of just the rule mechanics. I gotta say, with the previous edition, ciphers weren't really clear. least for me. I know some other people out there also found ciphers to be a little bit tricky. I honestly think here in the character rulebook, ciphers are explained far, far better. They make far more sense. And I do understand that there are two kinds of ciphers. So we've got the non-tangible cipher. It could be an inspiration, the burst of adrenaline, what have you. Then we have the physical cipher, which is an item. It's a one and done item. Definitely understand ciphers way better. Let's wrap up. We're going to talk about advancement of the characters. So you earn experience points, and experience points by players can be spent on player intrusions. They can also be spent to improve your character. And there are a variety of different things that you can improve. And there are 4 that you need to accomplish at your current tier to move you up to the next tier. Now, one of the biggest ways that players can earn experience points is through a character arc. So it's recommended that each of the players come up with at least one character arc for their player character. They don't have to be super detailed. It could be that they're trying to get a job somewhere. Maybe they're looking to take vengeance on someone who's wronged them. Maybe they're looking to find something. Maybe they're looking to find someone. Those are easily character arcs. And as the player advances towards completing that arc, they will earn the experience points, just like they earn the experience points from the GM intrusions. So you can spend experience points on the player intrusion. You can also spend them on re-rolling a die. So if you've run out of effort, right? You don't have any pool points left. You can spend an experience point to still re-roll one more time. Character advancement. You can permanently add 4 to your stat pools. You can allocate however you want. Once again, all these cost 4 experience points. You can move toward perfection. So you get to increase one of your edge stats. Most characters are going to have edge in one of their pools to start off, and it is a discount essentially. So if you had an edge of 1 in might, whenever you spend points from your pool from might, you actually spend 1 less point. So if you've got an ability that costs 1 point to activate, it's essentially free. So moving towards perfection, you get to add +1 to edge. You get extra effort, advance your effort score. So to tier 1, you can only use 1 level of effort. You can't spend multiple points to get more than 1 level of effort. So you can bring the difficulty of something down 1. If you have extra efforts, you can use more than that. And then you also have skills. So you can choose a skill, and there are some specific things here when you're purchasing it. You can do that. And then there are some other items that you can spend your experience points as well. So whenever you've bought 4 advancements, no matter what they are, you go up to the next tier. It's pretty easy there. So that is a peek inside the Cypher Character Rulebook. Let's swing back over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. So let's talk about the production quality because it is top notch. Love the artwork throughout. It is very, very good artwork, and there's a lot of it. So you will see tons and tons of art. Now, there are some character designs that are fairly small as far as the images used. That's okay. Something else I want to mention. The font is not huge. I had no problem reading it. And I got to say, I appreciate the smaller font because there is a lot packed into this book. So there is not a whole lot of wasted space throughout the character rulebook for Cypher. So I was very pleased by that. Paper stock is solid. And I will say this has a stitched binding. So this is a 320 page volume that I think should hold up fairly well at your game table as long as you don't abuse it. So let's talk a little bit about what's changed from Cypher system to Cypher. The character generation is streamlined. It's far easier and far more intuitive to create a character. I like how we've got the various different genres that give us our types. You just jump right to it and you're going to create your character, be good to go, ready to jump in and start playing. So I definitely dig that. Now, also keep in mind, the real world characters don't normally get a foci. So a little bit different there, although there is also still a game master option that the player can choose 2 more skills for their real world character, but that is only an option. The combat has changed a bit. First off, we no longer have damage coming off of the attribute pools. We do have wounds. Now, there are still ways for players to take damage to their pools. It is rare, and it's usually a very powerful attack that's going to actually take points off of might, speed, and intellect. Normally, you're going to take damage to your different wounds. Combat also seems a little more streamlined. There are more ways to defend against attacks. So that's something else that you want to keep in mind. Combat is not really crunchy because remember, this is a narrative forward role-playing game. It's all about story. It's not necessarily really too concerned about tactics and things like that, at least in the character rulebook. In the GM's guide, we may see more detail as far as conflict, combat, and so forth. Something else that's important to note is the rules have been broken up into 2 books. So we do have the character rulebook that has essentially, technically, all the rules you need to play. And then you also have the GM's guide, which is going to flesh out a lot of the things that were touched upon here in the character rulebook, like the intrusions and ciphers and running the game, essentially. So it is no longer just one big volume that has everything you need. It is now divided up into 2 volumes. And then there is also a player option book that is on the horizon too. I think it comes out before the end of the year. So some people might not like the fact that Cypher is broken up essentially into 2 books. I don't really have that big of an issue with it because you're looking at the character rule book is what the players would get copies of. They don't need to get the GM's guide as well. So there are some wholesale changes. Now, once again, I'm sure there are other things that I just missed. I should also once again mention the descriptors. Little less exciting now. I mean, they're fine, but there seemed to have been a little more uniqueness with the descriptors in the Cypher system as opposed to Cypher. But those are essentially the major changes that I stumbled across. So, one of my major things I look at when I'm recommending a role-playing game, especially when it's a core book, a core system, player's book, what have you, would I want to play the game? Would I want to run the game? That also comes into play. And I've got to say, I really like Cypher. I liked Cypher's system a bunch. I think it is very cool. I think it is a great genre agnostic system out there. You can pretty much plug in whatever you want to play into Cypher. There are also plenty of setting books out there. If you're looking for like fantasy, cyberpunk, Weird West, there are many, many books out there, and they are supposed to be about 95% compatible. So this is a backwards compatible game for the most part. I'm sure there's a few things that you would need to tweak, but I gotta be honest, I think I would have a hell of a good time playing Cypher, and I would also enjoy running it as well. I love the intrusions. I think that is so cool. It's like, okay, well, if you want to earn some experience points, let's change the story up a little bit. Very cool. So, on a scale of 0 to 10, I give Cypher's Character Rulebook a 9 out of 10. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like the Gaming Gang, if you feel this is a valuable resource, hell, if you just like what we do, there are a few ways that you can support the outlet. You'll find information down in the show notes, such as utilizing DriveThruRPG, making a one-time donation by way of PayPal, becoming a monthly member of our Patreon, etc. Also down in the show notes, you'll find an invite link to our Discord server. It's absolutely free to sign up, so be sure to hang with the gang over on Discord. Of course, if you enjoy the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. If you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. And if you ring the bell, be sure you select all notifications, because that way you'll find out not only when I share videos such as this review, you'll also be informed when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central, as I bring you the latest in tabletop role-playing game news and more. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for the latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are never going to see on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, and until I see you next time, certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.